Edward Lee Thorndike developed the theory of connectionism. Along with that came the law of readiness, the law of exercise, and the law of effect. He was born August 31st of 1874. He was born in Williamsburg, Massachusetts, to Edward Roberts Thorndike and Abby Ladd Thorndike. His father was a Methodist minister who had previously been an attorney, and his mother was a homemaker. He attended Wesleyan University and graduated with the class of 1895. He then went to Harvard University, but left there in 1897. He completed his PhD at Columbia University in 1898. His first job was a teaching position at College for Women of Case Western Reserve in Cleveland, Ohio. He stayed there for barely a year. He married Elizabeth Moulton on August 29th of 1900. Together they had 4 children: Elizabeth Frances, Edward Moulton, Alan, and Robert Ladd. Each of their children earned a PhD and were encouraged to pursue higher education and to have careers that enhanced their minds. Edward Thorndike spent his entire career as a professor at Teachers College at Columbia University until he retired in 1939. While there, he developed the theory of connectionism. He believed that through experience, connections were formed between perceived stimuli and emitted response. It was his thought that people of higher intellect could form more bonds and form them more easily than people of lower ability. The ability to form bonds was rooted in genetic potential through the genes' influence on the structure of the brain, but the content of intellect was a function of experience. Thorndike rejected the idea that a measure of intelligence independent of cultural backgrounds was possible. The theory of connectionism states that learning is the result of associations forming between stimuli and responses. Such associations or habits become strengthened or weakened by the nature and frequency of the stimuli and response pairings. The law of readiness states that a series of responses can be chained together to satisfy some goal, which will result in annoyance if blocked. The law of effect says that any behavior that is followed by pleasant consequences is likely to be repeated, and any behavior followed by unpleasant consequences is likely to be stopped. Thorndike found this directly applicable to education because it indicated that mere repetitive drill would be ineffective. A child should obtain satisfaction from his correct responses, and his lessons should be such as would enlist a child's interest and awaken a zeal for immediate achievement. Through experimental studies of children's specific difficulties in reading, arithmetic, algebra, and other subjects, Thorndike and his students worked out procedures for meeting the child on the child's own ground and for individualizing education. Thorndike was a huge proponent for individualized education and project-based learning. The law of exercise says that connections become strengthened under repeated practice, but connections weaken when associations are stopped. Through use of these laws, Thorndike made use of puzzle boxes and studied animal psychology. Puzzle boxes included experiments with cats. Cats were placed in boxes with food outside of the box. The box would be opened if the cat pulled a string, stepped on a lever, or flipped a lever. With trial and error, the cat would eventually open the box or produce a favorable consequence. Thorndike found that the cat would adopt this behavior and produce behavior more quickly each time, thus creating a habit. Thorndike worked with William James at Harvard and with James M. Cattell at Columbia. William James opened the first psychology lab in the United States, and James Cattell was the co-founder and co-editor of the Psychological Review. In his later life, he retired in the year of 1939. Prior to that, in 1912, he became the president of the American Psychological Association. In 1934, he became the second president of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. After retirement from 1942 to 1943, he was a William James lecturer at Harvard University. Edward Lee Thorndike passed away on August 9th of 1949. Edward Thorndike had many accomplishments throughout his life. A lot of the accomplishments that he had are not readily available. One has to look very hard to find them. He was not a man who spent a lot of time out in society. He liked to be alone or with a few people, most of the time in his study or in his laboratory. However, he is known as the father of modern education. That is because he spent a lot of time developing assessment tests and studying theories on the way that students best learn or the most appropriate way to analyze the results that students are producing. Throughout his career, he wrote over 500 books or journal articles that can be found quite readily. He helped to design the alpha and beta versions of the ASVAB, which is an aptitude test given to individuals who are looking to join the United States military forces. He developed a method of measuring a child's intelligence and their ability to learn. Along with that method of measuring intelligence and aptitude came the words IQ and mental age. Those became buzzwords in the educational society and became much more readily used based upon his work. In 1911, Thorndike constructed a scale to measure children's writing, and in 1944, he produced a table of word frequencies. many of these things are still used today, or a revised version of them is used. While he was doing these studies on children's writing and on word frequencies and children's ability to recognize words quickly and readily, he did study whether or not children recognize and retain words better that are written in block letter form or joined together as in cursive writing, and he did find that children recognize and recall words more readily that are joined together as one unit. I found that to be very interesting myself. I also reviewed a book that he wrote in 1921, The Teacher's Word Book, which is a list of high frequency words that students should know, and it labels at which stage throughout the education children should know these words. And they are words that he pulled from society and that children should be ready to read at certain stages in life. And that book was very interesting to read because of the fact that they were normal everyday words, but they also increased in difficulty. I compared it somewhat with the lists that are used today, and it's very comparable. Not much has changed in all of these years according to the list that he had produced back then. Another thing that Edward Lee Thorndike researched and discovered is that adults do not lose their ability to learn as they age. Not only did he study children, he studied humans through their whole spectrum of life, and he did realize that adults can learn. There is not a time when they stop learning, but it might be a little harder for them to retain, or they may learn a little bit more slowly. So with that information came the development and the opening of adult education centers across America and adult education classes. More adults now go to college. More older adults go to college. I myself am one of those. I'm a grandmother and I'm in college. And we still to this day have a lot of adult ed programs where individuals that did not have opportunities when they were younger are back in school or are taking these literacy classes, or even classes on learning how to do things that a person might want to do just as a hobby. It's never too late to learn, and we can attribute that to Thorndike. I think that that's an amazing thing that he discovered, because too many times people are saying, I can't learn that, I can't do whatever, but it's scientifically proven by Thorndike that that's not the truth. And one thing that I read said that it dispels the age-old adage that you can't teach an old dog new tricks. I included my bibliography on here, and there are some of these are books that I found online. There are some of his actual works that I reviewed, and some books that are available because they've been scanned in that were written a very long time ago. They're very interesting to read, and then there are some websites that are interesting if you wanted to learn more information about Thorndike. The book that he wrote in 1921, The Teacher's Word Book,